Hello, my name is Yevgeny Khessin. I'm the CTO and co-founder of DIMO Network. Today with us, we have Andrew Hill, who is one of the founders of Tableland, one of our partner Web3 projects. Andrew, how are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how Tableland got started? We're always curious to hear the initial founding story.
Yeah, sure. My co-founder and I have had a really interesting journey together. We both started in Web 2, really working on different data projects in different spaces. And we came together really asking broadly what the future of data on the internet was going to look like. And what we were seeing at the time were a few patterns that made us feel uneasy, but also made us feel optimistic that new things would be coming. So some of those patterns were data was quickly ramping up on the internet. The data collection was happening. It was being siloed in these massive organizations. And I've said a number of times that I got this feeling that the data silos that technology companies were building are among the most valuable assets we've ever built as humanity, which is a funny thing to think about. And then there was this counter idea that individuals in society had very little ownership over the data they were creating, while at the same time they were creating more and more data about more and more nuanced and specific things about their lives every year. So we just started asking, what would it look like if we could embed more data specific protocols into the internet? We got our start really working in peer-to-peer. We worked on the IPFS stack quite a lot, and libp2p, and trying to build libraries and tooling for people to put things together, to move data around in permissioned and controlled ways. And a couple of years ago, we really started hearing from people what they really wanted were ways to tie that to on-chain rules and on-chain ownership. And that's where the ideas of Tableland came from, really thinking that what would it look like if we could build a unified database across smart contracts and across the blockchains, that just had simple rules for how you could create new data assets in that database, and then use the on-chain use your on-chain smart contracts to generate ACL and ownership and all your specific rules for how your project will change your data assets in that database. And so that's really the origin of Tableland. It's been used for a lot of different use cases that kind of can be served by that model.
That's very interesting. I remember looking at Tableland actually a few years ago, just as Demo was getting started, and well, it's certainly exciting to finally reach this point where both of them are in production and both exist. And for us, it's very much a very similar idea that brought me personally and the rest of the founding team into Web3, which is that data ownership story, right? Uh, a car is the second most expensive thing anyone buys after a house, and some would say, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And with those two things did not quite align for me personally, because you are paying for the car, right? It's 60, $70,000 now with the cost of new cars from new manufacturers. So definitely very much aligned with you guys on that. And giving users more ownership is why we're building here in Web3. So follow-up question on that. Uh, Tableland is a protocol for inserting data into the chain and providing rules about how the data can be accessed and how it can be modified and shared. Is there my understanding is you guys recently launched a product built on Tableland, the protocol that kind of allows people to start using it who are maybe less Web3 savvy. Can you tell us a little bit more about that product?
Yeah, so we launched Tableland Studio a few months ago, really with this idea that we had designed Tableland, the core protocol, for initially for pretty deep developers. So to use it, you wrote smart contracts, you used our CLI, you configured your access control, you started inserting data with SQL. Um, and what we felt was that a lot of developers could understand that, but then they had a hard time taking the things they built and handing it off to other people that were going to have to manage data, be able to collaborate with the data, people that were going to just want better user interfaces. And the Tableland protocol itself only has a couple of novelties. Like the database that you're using in Tableland uses SQL, uses a specific specification of SQL, but nothing would feel unfamiliar to somebody who's used SQL before. It's a database. A lot of the ways that you change it are familiar. The things that are quite different about Tableland are those ideas of like how you bring collaborators in, how you collaborate on data sets and distribute ownership, how you actually organize a project, and who's working on that project. And so Tableland Studio was the UI really focused on that novelty and trying to make that easier. How do I launch a project? How do I create different spaces of data and distribute ownership of those spaces? How do I see how those data sets are changing and how my collaborators are changing them? And it's a work in progress. Like I think the core features are there, but there's a lot more that still needs to be done to really make that shine for everybody. But yeah, you can go into it today, start creating projects, distribute ownership of data, create those rules, monitor how your data sets are changing, and connect to other data sets of other projects and leverage the interoperability of data on the network.
It's very interesting. So when you say connect other data sets, my understanding is you guys are multi-chain today. So could I even query data that's some of it's on Ethereum, some of it's on Polygon, and be able to merge that together for some kind of a query that I want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So the rules for how you change data are very on-chain governed. So you're not going to be able to change data on one chain through transactions on another chain unless you as a project build those sorts of bridges. We don't do that magically for you. So as long as you're creating data on the two chains according to the rules of those chains, all good. But when you pull it back out, Tableland, because this is highly interoperable data, it's all in tables, you can be running SQL, all that basic stuff. You can exactly that. You can merge data on the way out and be getting holistic views of data sets across different chains.
So we at DIMO actually recently started using Tableland and Tableland Studio. Over the last 2 years, we've been trying to add support for as many vehicles as possible so that anybody with a valid car could connect, which led to us grabbing data off NHTSA, European sources in Asia, and it became a very large database of around 130,000 rows of make, model, year combinations with all their individual information about miles per gallon, where the vehicle is made. Basically, the largest data set of its kind in terms of what vehicles exist out there in the world. And we were previously holding it in our very centralized SQL database. But one goal this year is to allow more people to build on DIMO, and that requires a developer who's not employed at General Infrastructure Inc. to be able to create those cars. And being able to specify what kind of car it is becomes quite critical. So it's that way, the device can look up this data on chain and see what template to use. Other applications could see what kind of a car it is. You could use this to build online car communities based on the vehicle type that you have. So from our side, Tableland's been a really great partner and made it really, really easy for us to insert all this data and allow us to set up those ACL permissions on chain for access to that data. One interesting thing that we did is tying Tableland tables directly on chain into our smart contracts. So every single manufacturer, which there is, I believe, around 140, 150 at this time, gets their own table. And in the future, the goal is to have those developers be able to specify as they make new models or new devices to specify, hey, I have this new device type, it uses this kind of modem, or it's this kind of card, it gets this kind of MPG. So very excited because it was super easy to create this actually on-chain access control. But all in all, what it enables is anyone out there to create a valid vehicle, and for the community to then update those definitions as well via suggestions on, hey, there's this car that maybe was made a few years ago that a manufacturer hasn't added? Can I add support for this? Can you tell me a little bit more about how you guys are thinking of Tableland Studio being a collaboration tool?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that those flows are exactly the ones um, that are not ingrained in a lot of Web 2 tools. Like you don't build a lot of Web 2 projects and then think, oh, how do I turn over control of this to the community and like somehow have ownership and provenance rules that we're going to unwind and figure out how they can contribute. It's never really like that. And so a lot of the Web3 ethos has pushed us to think about how do we flip these tools and say like, well, actually, access control is kind of the first primitive. Like, are you an owner? Are you a member? Are you a voter? Are you a delegate? Those are really common primitives. And so Solidity and smart contracts more generally um, have been are really well suited now for defining those rule sets. And so what Studio does is allows you to access those rule sets and apply them to data sets. And then for collaborators on your data sets to actually not have to worry so much. Like if they are a member, if they are a contributor, they'll be able to go to Studio and immediately see the projects that they're contributing to and be able to engage with them. And so for you as sort of like a project builder or maintainer, you can track and monitor what's happening across the entire ecosystem. But in the future, we hope that people that are contributors to your project could come in and see exactly what they're allowed to do and then be able to engage with those data sets in a way that you give them permission to, or your project or your network or your protocol gives them permission to. And so right now, a lot of that tracking and visibility is there. And then in the future steps will be those, how do I add that car? Like, how do I actually propose a car to be added to this table? And then what are the steps after I do that proposal? Is that something that, DIMO voting will happen? Are there actual steps, or do I have the right to directly insert that row? So a lot of those things are going to be exposed.
I see. I see. So it sounds almost like a temporary table for community members to vote on, and that's a really cool use case. Of like a few years ago, I remember we heard about token gated registries, but they weren't quite as functional as we all hoped it would be. It sounds like with bringing a common model like SQL, right, and being able to use this model along with access control, we're finally actually getting to a much more functional and live version of that token gated registry.
Well, what's really interesting about that is like we're building a product at the end of the day for customers, and it really takes customers like you to tell us like what does our network need? Like how do we expect this to happen? And so like token gated registries are a great innovation and idea, but it really takes a project like yours that needs something to then drive the nuances of how it comes to production and how it gets wrapped into products. So while we're not there yet, we're actually just like listening to you and saying, hey, how does DIMO imagine this like token gating working? And can we build that into a general idea? Because it's actually in our mind and probably in your mind, it's good if the model that you start using in your network can also help drive a standard that other projects can start using so that we can all innovate and make it better and make it more performant and embed it in more places. And so, yeah, I think I totally agree with you. I just think the timing is now with projects like yours that are finally needing it and have the customers that are driving that need.
We there's a similar question that actually came up at Consensus last week, and it was very much similar answer, which is the fastest way to build a protocol is to put it in users' hands to make sure that you're actually building functionality that people will use and fits their needs, as opposed to just, well, it's perfectly secure and perfectly decentralized, but
Yeah.
unusable, right? But my understanding is DIMO is also not the only project you guys are working with today, and that's using all of this functionality. What are some of the other projects in the DePIN space, or maybe outside DePIN space, that you guys are working with?
Sure. We have a number of different NFT projects that have been using Tableland. A lot of them have been using it for quite a while, really using NFTs as markers of ownership that then allow the owners of those NFTs to change parameters or swap the configurations that are happening that are being displayed in their NFT. We also, I think one thing that's been interesting in a lot of our discussions, one thing that happens with Tableland is it's a very slow data protocol. So it's for these cases where you really want specific row level access control or small data set access control, and people collaborating on them. And so they work really well with these projects where the data originates on chain more. So like NFTs or the DeMo cars, where like the car manufacturers uploading a car, maybe there's a bulk insert, but then there's a car at a time, and that needs to actually propagate out into new relational models of people that own that car, or NFTs that represent that car. Really good for those models. There's another set of use cases that require a lot more original data to be inserted into a protocol and then be queried out. And for that, we just launched Basin, which allows you to do unstructured data storage. And the key part of that is being able to store entire data sets at once for low cost and make those data sets available for retrieval in verifiable and fast ways. And so it pairs perfectly with Tableland, where this slow, highly permissioned data and this fast, highly ambiguously structured data. And so a good use case that's friends of both of ours is WeatherXM. So this is a great example of lots of data being produced off chain by these nodes on their network that then need to bulk insert this into a standard data format that then can be queried out. So it's a very cool pipeline of theirs where they're inserting data, becomes Parquet files, which are static. Essentially, you can think of them as like static databases that are highly structured so that you can be doing queries to the static file. And they store the Parquet files on Basin, and then they can query it out. So on the Tableland side, we have a lot of these on-chain use cases and NFTs and networks. And on the Basin side, we have a lot of these DePINs and large data producers. But that project's brand new, so hopefully you'll be hearing a lot more about our customers there soon.
WeatherXM is definitely a dear friend of ours, and definitely a project that I'm watching. But it sounds like between Basin and Tableland Studio, what we're really getting to here is just being able to have the next DePIN project, the next few projects come along and have an entirely distributed, verifiable data infrastructure available to them to get going and building on. Or if they're interested, augmenting existing data sets, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like it's something I've been trying to figure out in how to phrase this and how to phrase the difference here is in Web 2, we've built a lot of cloud infrastructure where the code is the infrastructure. And in Web 3, because of the way that ownership can be configured, because of these ideas of provenance and verifiability being so core to what we're doing, it's much more like the data is the infrastructure. And so we build everything around the data sets so that we can build this bigger thing. And so like what changes about our tool set? What changes about how we connect these tools into pipelines and all of that good stuff to build this data fabric for society and allow people to be creating new data sets and merging data sets and building pipelines and knowledge on top of those data sets.
I would definitely agree with that from my time spent working on large enterprise data lakes. But the way I see it, I think basically what you had just said, we're sort of turning every user into a data producer, which they always have been, but now it's not hidden away behind some enterprise and things they do, but everyone is truly properly represented as the data producer or data consumer and the right ownership rights over that data.
Yeah. Yeah, fully. And there's this like tug and there's like this, kind of give and take. Like back like 8 years ago, I think I was like, yeah, we should just build protocols that are all, like fully user owned, make it all private. Like I didn't know the terminology back then, but like kind of we should just ZK everything and like. But at the same time, like most of consumers want the convenience of like not running their own infrastructure. They don't always, they don't mind delegating access to their data to applications in return for value. And so there's a much more complicated system that we need to build that can get both pieces. Like how do you have data sovereignty and control and visibility over what's happening with your data? And then also how do you get all the benefits of pooling your data with applications you trust or believe in the value they give you. And DeMo is a great example of like giving people exactly that with encrypted and private trip data that you permission specifically to the applications that give you value and nobody else. And that's a really exciting direction. But I think there's so much more innovation that has to happen. Getting back to your previous question, to build the data architecture tools that allow us to do that, right? Like, and do it at scale. So very excited to see where this goes.
There's definitely a lot to build on our side and, well, just generally in the Web3 space, right, to make that possible. But I do believe we'll end up in a better world that much more accurately represents people's values and interests. And, what you said, definitely true that while I have a data center in my house and I like to store my own data and do my own
Yeah.
backup, right, the average user or even the average developer does not necessarily want to run their own node, right? Or pick up a whole bunch of new infrastructure, new tools to learn. So I think it's an important part of us going down this vision is keeping that in mind, that fully decentralized and you store everything may not actually represent what the user is looking for. They want the control, right? And they want the privacy. They don't necessarily want to actually be a lot of the time storing the data themselves, which
Yeah.
yeah, is an important
So
aspect of.
okay, well that really brings up that question of decentralized infrastructure or this ability to run infrastructure across different projects and in different communities or by different people. And I'm really curious, like, what your vision is there and why that's important, you think, for DIMO.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of different reasons. So for the first one is user owned data, right? It for them it's about having optionality. They shouldn't be just locked into one digital infrastructure Inc. node or just one kind of data storage, right? Our goal here is to provide optionality with the privacy guarantees of you can store your data here or somewhere else. So that's the user side. But the other side of it is automotive is 100 years old, and for them, they actually look at it. They don't hear the word openness. They hear their version of this is vendor lock-in, right? Automotive space remembers when Phillips screws were a patented item you had to pay for. As funny as that sounds, right? So for them, the first question they ask is, "But you're just asking me to put the data in your storage." And for them, it's very important to know that they have the option of storing the data themselves if they want to. And in reality, it doesn't necessarily have to matter where the data lives. And the user, or that company in this case, which I still consider a user, can choose to store it themselves or go with a publicly hosted node or use AWS or any other infrastructure that they're looking for. But so those are, I would say, the two sides of it. On the developer side, they're just looking for to make the data. They want to access data easily. So from that perspective, it's just making sure that we can point them at the data in an easy way, which in our case is kind of an early version of that. But you can go onto your vehicle ID that's into the smart contract and actually specify the data storage URI, which in the future the device will use when it's in your car and turns on to say, hey, here's where I'm sending data. This is what the owner of my vehicle said I should do. And then developers can come along and also look that up and say, what's the data URI and authenticate. And if they have the right permissions, they'll be able to go to that storage layer and retrieve it. Obviously, like I was saying, one of our goals is also to remain quite agnostic, right? Some people might want to put their data in a DB2 instance using a mainframe, while our more forward-looking and let's say decentralization maximalists might want to just jump right into the experimental, like launching tomorrow basin, right? But I think for us, it's about optionality and users' optionality, and getting to that point where you get to choose how and when your data gets used.
Yeah, I think also that infrastructure story for DIMO, the resilience of the infrastructure is so much more salient in DIMO than, say, like a game, where like a game outage isn't going to necessarily hurt anybody. Maybe financially it could harm somebody, but when you're driving your car, the applications you use could really adversely impact you if you can't access them or if your data isn't going to them. So getting weather forecasts for where you're driving or those sorts of things that could be really critical and potentially like impact your well-being. So that really makes a lot of sense to me.
I think so too, and our founding team has spent a bit of time working in self-driving vehicles, and in that world, demo devices and the data produced really starts to act like a black box for an airplane. So coming back to your point about, how importance of data, today it's maybe starting off on the lighter side, but then you're going to start using this data to get an insurance quote, or maybe even get a loan, or maybe to reconstruct what happened in an accident, or in the future, a self-driving car, to be able to get data from another self-driving vehicle, right? And as we build on this infrastructure, the resiliency becomes really critical. And that was actually one of the main reasons we went with Tableland Studio, is because once the data is inserted into the smart contract, it's there forever, and you can go get it even today out of hundreds of nodes, right? So we can be sure that this data is not going to disappear, and over time we'll get to that guarantee for any even individual data for a specific user.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool.
That's it. We've got lots of things to build before we get there, right? But we're here for the long term. Andrew, I guess last question for you. What are some of the other things that are coming up next for you that other builders might be excited about or should know about?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm just going to use this. I'm going to use this moment to just pitch an idea. I'll run it by you.
All right.
So I gave this talk in Denver, and I tried to brush it up a little bit in Boston, but I feel a little bit like a comedian trying to work on his material, and nobody's laughing yet. But so when I look at the developments in AI, I see a couple of different trends that are really important for our work, and they all point to the domain of synthetic data being super interesting and important for Web3 to figure out. And I'll just briefly summarize why I think synthetic data in Web3 is more interesting than a lot of other AI concepts in Web3. So the generation of synthetic data is going to be the major unblock to the next generation of LLMs and large scale models. We're basically, like, all models currently have consumed all high quality language data. We know that investment is happening in creating high quality synthetic data that can surpass that. It's going to touch a lot of other fields. So we know the demand for synthetic data is about to skyrocket. It also means that the amount of data in the world is about to skyrocket. If you imagine waiting for real humans to produce data versus running models that can produce synthetic data, it's very easy to 10, 100x the amount of data being produced. And then the generation of synthetic data is very easy to distribute. So we can be generating synthetic data on distributed compute and decentralized compute much easier than, say, training foundation models. And so I think this is a really exciting area. And so right now I've actually been going out and pitching different compute networks on different ideas for how we could be producing synthetic data that will be interesting to Web3 consumers, Web3 developers. And so hopefully I'll have a couple of things to share there over the next month or so.
That's actually a very interesting idea. The AI is very exciting, but it has this, it does have somewhat of a privacy problem too, right? And I've been hearing about synthetic data approach as well recently. And I think that's a very interesting take and a slightly different way to solve this problem. Because at the end of the day, right now we're compromising all of our data. And on the long time frame, I personally hope that it will be my model that I've trained, right?
Yeah.
It's just specific to me. But in the medium term, it's certainly not possible for me to run that kind of online learning on my phone or honestly on any of the devices I own. So in the meantime, I do think that using synthetic data based on real world data is a really good kind of middleman approach, where you don't have to give up where I live and what I'm doing, but we can all together as a Web3 community kind of come together and create them in a way that doesn't compromise anyone's privacy, and then we can all benefit from it without giving all of our information to Microsoft today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in these sort of network configurations, it's going to be really interesting. There's a lot of research going on right now about how practical it is to embed private data inside of these models so that they won't leak the private data back. But people are very actively trying to figure that out. There's a really great research group in Cambridge that they have a great YouTube channel if you want to see kind of how they're thinking about that. The question I keep having in my mind is, at what point could I sort of fine tune or train my own model and embed a password in it that it would only give back to me. Like how close to that level of privacy or private could we get where I could confidently put it in there and think that nobody could scan through it and figure out that that was the one that I had. That would be a challenge I'd love to see. But yeah, like, can you take your trip data from DIMO, produce 1,000x that data that is all fake, but sort of accurately samples the space of these different parameters in some hyperparameter space, feed that to a model that then can do things like predicting when you're going to be using your car, giving you suggestions about how to improve, your energy consumption, when you should be plugging in predictively, things like that. I think are all pretty tangible, but take a lot of work.
They definitely take a lot of work. Building data infrastructure is hard, especially hard when you're trying to protect user data. But there's actually we on our developer roadmap we have vehicle simulators coming later this year. So maybe that's something we should actually talk about, because while I have built a manually generated one, I think it'd be much more interesting if we could train an open model and have the demo users contribute their data to it, and that
Absolutely.
later. That would be quite interesting. Probably get much more realistic data than well
That's
the way
that's
everyone
the way.
right the way everyone's been doing it is you take some lat long at the beginning and end of a trip, and you just put some points in between, using good old division and multiplication. But
Mm,
probably much better if we can use real data, and probably a very interesting way to maybe even create an incentive for the community to participate in something like that, where there's a clear value to the developer on the other side that they're providing by using this simulator model, and maybe even creates a market for different simulator models for, like, you want to simulate a Ford versus a BMW. I'm going off the deep end, but it's
no,
fun
no,
to
it's
think.
really interesting. Yeah, like the uh, uh, Nosh, the network up in Fort Collins, does like DoorDash, but on a federated network. Very cool project. And I was talking to them, and I was thinking about how one of the hardest problems of competing with like an Uber Eats is actually going to be their predictive tasking. Like, how do you task people to go to the right areas because people are going to be picking up food from there at certain times? And then how do you avoid like high traffic areas? Like, how do you maximize profit based on the highest OpEx, which is like moving the cars around? And to do that, you're going to need this data. And so there's this world where, yeah, like you could be taking that data and in the future, basically like selling into a Nosh driver, like the best model that tells them where to go. And they go like, great, here's a small percentage of the extra profits I earned from going to that area. Like, that's the ideal future of that sort of system for sure.
Mm. Yeah, I've worked in I used to be in the good old days of 2018. It was called moving goods and moving people. But yeah, predictive demand is very difficult to do. It's and when you get Uber and Lyft size, that's actually where they spend almost all of their money, is dynamic pricing,
Totally.
demand. So
Totally.
very, and I'm almost positive that they're moving all of that into an AI based model, that they're just feeding weather, right,
Yeah.
hockey, sports events, anything happening within the city. But I'm sure that it's would certainly be beneficial to them to train this model much faster if they could generate these data sets more quickly, but also, with privacy in mind, is another important element here as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's the exact analogy to NVIDIA has their 3D factory space that is basically a physics simulator that you can build a mock of your factory into and train your robots
Mhm.
inside of this, because it's much easier to run a million simulations that way. And so your car simulation is just like the tip of the iceberg there of simulating entire, potentially in the future, entire cities and doing and helping create those kinds of models for sure.
That is, I've got some ideas to chat with you about next week.
Okay.
But very interesting, very interesting. So you guys are working on synthetic models, and it's where you guys are making improvements to Tableland Studio, and I'm excited to also see what the demo community does with the Tableland Studio and adding more information about each car. That's going to be exciting to see. Um, is there anything else you guys have coming up on the roadmap that you want everyone should know about?
Well, I think the next big stop for us is actually simply EthCC. So Marla and my team is going to be there at so many events and so many speaking slots. So hopefully people want to hear more about Tableland Studio, Basin, some of these synthetic data projects. Hopefully we'll have some information about by then too. So if you want to talk about any of that, just get in touch, and Marla and my team will be happy to meet with you.
That sounds great. Well, Demo will be there as well. So if anyone's looking for active feedback on using Tableland, we'll be there to answer any questions. Or if you want to do something between Demo, Tableland, and anyone else in Web3, it's a collaborative space. So yeah, please come chat with us.
Cool.
Cool. Well, Andrew, thank you for joining us today, and I'm excited to see what the Web3 community builds on our collaboration here. And
Yeah.
we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.